Hello, my name is Josep Grau-Bové, Associate Professor of Heritage Science in the Institute for Sustainable Heritage. Welcome to the online home of the ISH Academy, which is where we organize training courses or our monthly lectures. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce my colleague, Pakhee Kumar, and her talk. But before I do that, I will just run you through the basics of how this works. I mean, obviously, at this stage of hybrid working, everyone knows how Zoom works, but it never hurts to run through the basics. So the main means of communication with the speaker is using the Q&A button that is at the bottom of your screen. You can write your questions at any time. The talk lasts about between 40 and 50 minutes, and the remaining time to the hour is going to be dedicated to Q&A. The whole thing fits inside an hour. When we are at the Q&A phase, I am going to moderate the questions, reading them aloud to our speaker, so that all of you can hear them, because you have no sight of the questions submitted by others. I think that's everything. I'll introduce Pakhee now. Pakhee is a conservation architect with more than 10 years of experience in heritage conservation and management. She has worked with many interdisciplinary international teams and challenging projects in India, the UK, Italy, and Denmark. Her goal is to reshape the heritage practices using present-day technologies to increase the efficiency of the professionals. Pakhee, after obtaining her PhD, she joined ISH in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. So we had to wait a little bit to meet Pakhee in person. We collaborated online for about a year. And after I met her in person, we still made her wait a little bit to organize this presentation, which is long overdue, I must say. Pakhee's topic of research, the use of social media to understand response to disasters, is very timely, and I think that's reflected in the interest this talk has garnered. I'm told there are around 91 registrations, which seem that are translating to a very nice group of participants. So thank you very much for joining, and Pakhee, it's over to you.
Thanks, Joseph. Let me quickly share my screen. Okay. Sorry, it's
not visible yet.
Not visible yet. Oh, all right. Okay. I think this should be fine. How about now? Do you see full presentation?
Yeah, not in presentation mode, but we see the screen.
Presentation. I'm sorry, I have 3 screens in front of me, and it's a little bit complicated. I will stop sharing. It's been a while that I used Zoom, so I will try again. How about now?
Excellent.
Cool. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me, Joseph. It's a pleasure here. It's a pleasure to be here, and very lovely to see some of the familiar names in the chat of participants. Today, I would like to present my research on social media crowdsourcing and disasters affecting cultural heritage. A good part of what I will be presenting today, I did it during my PhD. I will be presenting some of the works which I've collaborated with the others. So many thanks to my co-authors and my collaborators that worked with me on achieving such a difficult task, to be honest. So just to give you an overview of the presentation, there are 4 main arguments that I will be making today. The first argument is that during disasters, people are willing and motivated to help. However, organizations need to learn how they can effectively utilize the wisdom of crowds. The second argument is that lessons from the past can help us understand crowdsourcing during disasters. The third argument is during disasters, user-generated data from social media can help us understand the damage that has happened on ground. And the fourth argument is that AI can help us in the damage assessment process, which is a very is the process that happens immediately after disasters to understand how much damage has happened to a heritage site. So I'd like to remind you of a very familiar event that I'm extremely sure that you would remember this very clearly. The Malaysian airline plane MH370 that disappeared mysteriously in 2014. And after this event, some of the crowdsourcing platforms, such as Stormnode, had initiated projects to basically find the missing airline. And they had downloaded the satellite images, given them to volunteers to identify if they could see anything which looked like debris to them. And thousands of volunteers spent hours together to basically help Malaysian Airlines search for this flight. And this is not the first time. A lot of events, a lot of times when a disaster happens, you would see people who are motivated and who are willing to spend time and resources just to be able to help organizations to understand the damages, to understand the damages that has been done to the site or anything at all. So crowdsourcing is basically a very popular method in which the crowd are generally, they are motivated to participate. Now, I think at this point, I would like to unpack the term crowdsourcing, because for some of you, it might be a new term altogether and you might not be familiar with it. It's an umbrella term which is used for a variety of approaches in which a large group of people perform small tasks in order to achieve a collective goal. In today's context, we've seen crowdsourcing being internet being a popular medium to initiate these crowdsourcing projects, but crowdsourcing did exist before the internet age as well. One of the examples that is very popular and you could relate to is Oxford English Dictionary, which was first created using crowdsourcing. There's an excellent paper, if you're interested to understand crowdsourcing before the internet age, there's an excellent paper which is published on this. I suggest you have a look at that. Coming back to crowdsourcing during disasters. Crowdsourcing during disasters, it is a time-sensitive activity and it also relies heavily on public participation. So if it is not done in time-sensitive manner, the value of crowdsourcing is lost. And also, if there's limited public participation, again, the value of crowdsourcing is somehow lost, wherein you would. Yes.
Sorry for the interruption, but we are still on the first slide. I don't know if that's intentional or not.
Oh, sorry, I don't know why that is happening. How about now?
Yes, we are now on the slide with 4 bullet points on an image.
Thank you so much, Joseph. No, I was moving on my other screen. It doesn't help to have 3 screens in front of me.
I must say I was rather enjoying the narrative style, but that's fine.
All right. Thank you so much. So, unfortunately, you missed the slide 1, in which I list all my arguments, but I'll come back to this again in conclusion. So this is an image of the crowdsourced Malaysian airline search, in which some crowdsourcers said that these were debris of the missing plane. Now, again, coming back to disasters, crowdsourcing during disasters. Crowdsourcing during disasters is time sensitive and it requires public participation. And in recent years, what we have seen is that there have been attempts to initiate crowdsourcing projects during disasters that affect cultural heritage. But these, I'm sorry, just one second. I'm giving a presentation. Fantastic. Please go and look it up. Sorry about that. You would expect it when you have children, when you will have such kind of interruptions. Okay, I'll go on. So in recent years, what we have seen is there have been attempts to initiate crowdsourcing projects in disasters that affect cultural heritage. But we've seen limited participation in this, and we've also seen other kinds of problems, issues in these crowdsourcing initiatives. One of the initiatives that I would like to talk about is an initiative that was started by Wikipedia right after the fire in the National Museum of Brazil. Wikipedia wanted to preserve the memory of lost heritage in that heritage that was lost during the fire of National Museum of Brazil. And you can see here on the left-hand side that they disseminated this initiative using Twitter. And on the right-hand side, you can see the kind of submissions they got on Wikipedia. Now, this initiative was an excellent initiative for us to understand what happens when you initiate a crowdsourcing right after disaster happens. There's data which is incomplete. So that is data without an explanation, which you would not, so because they wanted to preserve the memory of lost heritage, it would have been nicer to see where these objects were from or which gallery did they belong to and so on, but the data was incomplete here. And there was also the problem of quality of data. So they requested images of objects, but there were some people who posted their own pictures on the platform and not the images of the objects that were lost necessarily. And also, I think that a very small amount of data was posted during this this initiative. There were about 20 million objects that were lost, but only a few hundred submissions that were received. Now, there are several tools and applications that are available to us because of the internet, because of the Web 2.0. But we have very limited research and very limited application of such technology in the context of cultural heritage that is lost during disaster. And thankfully, we do have some examples of crowdsourcing that we could learn from to be able to understand how we could do crowdsourcing better in today's. One of the examples that I research is the 1966 Florence flood. So if you're not aware of the 1966 Florence flood, this was a flood that damaged a number of objects, thousands of objects, thousands of books, and the buildings were also damaged. And some of the objects were as old as 13th or 14th century. If you haven't been to Florence, what I would like to tell you is that a lot of cultural heritage organizations, such as the Uffizi Gallery and the National Library, are located in the banks of Florence. So when the flood happened, these organizations were one of the first ones to get affected. And because of the amount of heritage that was damaged during this disaster, committees were formed in Italy, the UK, USA, Netherlands, and I'm sure many other countries that I do not know. And these committees were comprised of art historians, curators, heritage managers, politicians, academics, and many different people from many different backgrounds. Really. What was their goal? Their goal was to firstly rescue heritage, secondly restore heritage, and thirdly to raise funds to restore heritage. And the committee that was based in the US had a fundraising goal of approximately $2.5 million, which is roughly equivalent to about $20 million today. And they did meet this fundraising goal. The committee, which was based in the UK, they collected about more than 200,000 pounds, and the committee that was based in Italy, we do not know how much money they had collected, but it was also a substantial amount. So one of the reasons why committees wanted to get money from the crowd was also because the capacity of the government was limited, and most of the help that was going to the government was for the people of Florence rather than the heritage. So how did they initiate the call? This is a letter that was sent from the Italian committee, and if you read this carefully, which of course we do not have the time to read it entire, but I'll give you a synthesis of this. They start by describing the extent of damage that was done in Florence. They want to, I'm sorry, I think I've done the same thing again when I've gone to the next slide in my other screen. So this is the slide that you should be looking at. Sorry about that. So one of the things that committee did was they started with describing the extent of damage in Florence. They also evoked a memory. So when they say that the heritage is destroyed more than what was done by the war within the walls in 1944. So during the World War, Florence was affected too, but 1966 damaged the heritage of Florence much more than 1944. So they wanted to evoke a memory or for the people to understand how much damage had been done in Florence. And they also wanted to highlight the ongoing non-stop rescue operation by telling what people of Florence are doing. And they also defined the problem in hand, wherein they said how limited the capacity of the government was really, and what they needed in order to restore the heritage of Florence. And they also described the importance of Florence. They say how important it is for all of the civilized world, because Florence represents the universal spirit of civilization and culture and art in the Western world. And lastly, they request to take immediate action. They say we need everybody, and this is how they say that whatever small contribution people can send should be sent to wherever the unrest was. So this is how they initiated the call to participate. And what was the result of it? The result of this was that people from all over the world contributed to save Florence's heritage. As you can see in the map here, these are the countries that I could find from a very limited data set, which is about 120 letters from about 125 participants. And these letters were sent from many different countries of the world, as you can see in the map here. And this was sent by individuals, institutions, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, newspapers, magazines, banks, theaters, foundations, TV, radio, and so on. This shows the diversity of crowd, really. People who are interested, or the kinds of organizations who are interested to save heritage. And this is a unique data in itself for us to be able to understand who are the people, or what kind of organizations, what kinds of people we can rely on when heritage is damaged. This is actually my favorite bit, wherein people who had not been to Florence at all, were also motivated to contribute. One of the main findings of my paper is that people who had been to Florence had this motivation to contribute to crowdsourcing because they understood the value of Florence. But what about people who hadn't been to Florence? They were equally motivated to participate in this crowdsourcing initiative. You can see from the letter, which was written by 8 to 9-year-old children, and I'm not sure if they understood where Florence was and where Venice was, because where Rome was, because they do ask is Pope hurt and is Vatican hurt, which is, I think, in itself is a very nice finding, because we understand that children who can be also motivated, people who have not been to heritage sites, who have not interacted with heritage of the country, can also be involved in crowdsourcing when disaster. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. Now that was lessons from the past. Now let's move on to the present, wherein we want to understand the technological landscape that we have today and how we can best utilize it to quickly understand what has happened on a site when a disaster happens. So to understand this, I use data-driven approach to understand the use of social media during disasters that affect cultural heritage. In the first part, I look at more than 200,000 tweets that were posted during the 2015 Nepal earthquake, and more than 6,000 images that were posted on Twitter during the Nepal earthquake. What I wanted to understand is, how do people respond on social media when disaster affecting cultural heritage happens? In the second part, what I wanted to understand is, how can social media data be used for evaluating the situation on ground? There's a lot of data that comes on social media during disasters or during any event as such. But how can we use this data to understand what has happened on the ground? And as I mentioned before, I've collaborated with computer scientists to address the second part of this presentation. Next slide. Okay, so the response on social media, the tweets particularly. So, like I said, I used more than 200,000 tweets to understand how people respond on social media during disasters. And what I found was only a small number of tweets, which was about 4%, were posted regarding cultural heritage. At this point, I must tell you that the kind of data set that I had was not heritage specific, which meant that this data set was not collected keeping heritage in mind. So it's very likely that if I had a data set that's collected using heritage as a keyword or heritage sites as a keyword, the kind of analysis I would have might have been different. But anyway, so what I found was tweets had combination of user-generated data and mainstream media tweets, and tweets from mainstream media were retweeted more than user-generated tweets. So which tells you the importance of mainstream media during disaster. User-generated data is equally important, but mainstream media is also important during disaster. And most of these tweets are hybrid, which meant that they followed at least one of these 5 categories that I've mentioned here. So the 5 categories of tweets were information, sentiment, memory, action, and noise. By information, I mean when users tweeted about the situation of site, and sentiment was when they expressed sympathy, or they also expressed indifference towards heritage during this disaster. A lot of people did post memory, which is a unique category in disasters affecting cultural heritage. There's a very nice book that I recommend if you're interested in understanding the use of social media during disasters. It's called Big Crisis Data. And in that book, you will see different categories of tweets that do come up. And it's a compilation of many, many different researches. And you would see that memory does not exist as a category in humanitarian context. It exists as a category only in disasters that affect cultural heritage. Now, the next category is action. By action, in these tweets were the tweets that requested to take an action. There were some users who were on ground who invited others to come and volunteer in the heritage sites to rescue the heritage that was damaged. And lastly, there was noise. This is a very tricky category, and this tells you the challenge that you would face if you want to use social media data, really. There are the homonyms, which means the words that are used, the same word that are used in different contexts. Then there are ads. People use the hashtags just to generate interest in the event, and then they want to I'm sorry, I don't think I framed it nicely. So there are some people who would
yes. Is a slide 11 still the correct one?
Yes, it is.
Sorry.
No worries. No worries. So no, I was just speaking about noise here. So a lot of people, when events happen that are that generate interest of many thousands of people, they hack these hashtags and they post messages that are advertisements that are not at all related to disasters or the event as such. So those kind of tweets do go in noise. Okay, so just to give you some examples of the tweets that I encountered in this research. So information, like you can see, this was the category that had the most tweets. About 89% of the tweets were related to information. And an example of this is that historic Dharahara Tower had collapsed in Kathmandu after 7.9 earthquake. Sentiment was the next category, which was about 25% of the total tweets, in which people had said how sad they were that they had lost their temples and their history and the places that they had grown up. In memory, people did post pictures of what heritage sites looked like before they were destroyed. And in action, people requested the Nepal police to protect the heritage sites because some of the people, they could see that people are looting. Now, an example of noise here is a temple which was which was located in India and sending help to Nepal. Because it had the word temple, this was detected as as a tweet which was related to heritage, but it in reality wasn't related to heritage that was damaged in Nepal. All right. So let's move on to the images. And images, like I said, I analyzed more than 6,000 images that were posted on Twitter during the 2015 Nepal earthquake. And again, this data set included images that were not heritage specific. So Out of these, only about 8% of the images, about 8.7% of the images were related to heritage. Rest of them were not heritage. There were some images that were very difficult for me to understand whether this was of a heritage site, because either they were pixelated or they had lost the context, so I could not see the context and could not understand whether this was really the heritage site or not. And then there were images that were removed. These images were again problematic images that were not at all related to the disasters at all. In heritage, I could see many different categories, many different subcategories. The first one was situation. Again, people did post most of the images that related to the situation of the heritage site that was damaged in Nepal. The heritage sites did become a kind of a poster to send messages about Nepal. There were images that represented memory. There were images that represented practice. I'll show you in a moment some examples of these images. There were screenshots and edited images, and there were also other countries' heritage that was included in this data. And again, this finding is very important for us to understand how we can use the social media data to understand what is happening on site, because most of the data set, you can see 67% of the images represent situation, which means that we could use this data to understand what has happened on site really. So just to give you an example, these are the images that represent situation. The before after images wherein the before after images wherein they show the image of Dharahara Tower before it was damaged and then after it was damaged, and many different images were posted that showed the damaged heritage sites in Nepal. Heritage sites did become a background for sending out messages like stay strong Nepal, pray for Nepal, and so on. Again, memory is one of those very interesting themes that did occur in this data set as well. The memory of past earthquakes, as you can see here in the black and white images that were posted. People did remember past disasters during this disaster as well. People remembered being on heritage site before the disaster had happened, so they posted their personal memory of being on the heritage site before the disaster. Now, this is again another exciting category, which is practice. As you can see from the first three images, people did pray in the damaged heritage sites. This tells us how people in Nepal value their heritage. For them, it's not necessary that the heritage should be intact for them to actually go and pray in those heritage sites, but they continue to pray in these heritage sites even if they were down. And there's also an interesting example of taking selfies in disaster affected sites, as you can see in the picture here. All right, so move on to the next one. So what I wanted to do next was to understand how can we compare Twitter text and Twitter images. I wanted to understand what is the best possible way to assess the damage that has happened on site. And what I found is that there are two overlapping themes in Twitter, in tweets and in images, which is memory and information and speculation. These are the only two overlapping themes in this data set. And I've also found that Twitter tweet text, it tends to be more complicated than images. Why I say this, it's because most of the tweets that I read in this data set were hybrid, which meant that it included two or more themes that I have mentioned before. And then again, because of homonyms, because of the local names for the heritage sites, which might be different than what we understand, tweets become a little bit more complicated for us to assess what has happened on site. Whereas the images that are posted on Twitter, they offer a better avenue for assessment of the situation on the ground. I'm sorry, I've done this again. Okay. Please forgive me. So coming back to the main message of this slide, memory and information / situation are the only overlapping themes between tweets and images, and tweet text tends to be complicated, but images posted on Twitter, they offer a better avenue for assessment on the situation on the ground. Now that we understand that images are the best, images that are posted on social media are the best possible way to assess what has happened on ground, I'd like to tell you that it is impossible to manually assess this. It's because of the volume of tweets that gets posted during disasters. I do not recall correctly, but there's very interesting data that tells you how many tweets per second gets posted. Right. Okay. Now, yeah, I remember during one disaster in 2012, it was about 250 tweets per second, which meant approximately 15,000 tweets per minute. And this is a lot. This is a lot to be analyzed manually. So we do need a better system to be able to understand how to make sense of user-generated data really. And to understand this, I had collaborated with 3 computer scientists during my PhD and developed a heritage damage assessment model. Sorry, Joseph, could you please share the link on chat?
Yeah, Velvet just did.
Okay, super. Thanks, Velvet. So if you click in any of the images, what it will show you is the prediction. It should show you damage prediction, and it should show you heritage prediction. And if you cannot see it, I would suggest scroll down a little bit, then you will be able to see. Prediction which is close to 1, as close to 1, that means the model is sure of the prediction. So if it says heritage 0.9 something something something, it means that the model is very sure that this is actually heritage site. And same for damage. Unfortunately, we do not have the time to go in depth to tell you how we've developed it, but I think it's worth mentioning that the model currently has low precision. By low precision, I mean that what it means for professional like us is that we'll need to look at the images manually after the model has classified these images. But at the same time, it has high recall, which means that the chances of relevant images that are undetected is substantially low. So, which is a good combination, to be honest. So that we would most likely not miss relevant images, but at the same time, we'll have to do some manual work to be really able to understand the situation. So just to give you a few quick examples of the performance of the model, the ones that is classified as heritage, and that was actual label was also heritage, is here in this green box. As you can see, the model correctly identified images of heritage sites that were damaged during the drought. And there were images that were actually labeled as heritage, but by the model it was classified as not heritage. It is in this red box, and there are few patterns that do emerge from this, which is that if the context is not very clear, or if the focus is on people rather than the building, then the chances are that the model will not be able to detect this as a heritage. There are images which were labeled as not heritage and which were actually classified as heritage by the model, as you can see here in this red box, which is a big surprise for us, and I think we're still unable to detect why it has done so. Maybe because of some colors or something else that we do not know. And then there were images that were labeled as not heritage, and it was rightly classified as not heritage by the model in this green box. Now, I must tell you that the damaged model performed much better than the heritage model, which means that this model will classify images of damaged sites much better than the images of heritage sites only. As you can see here, some of the examples of the actual label which were damaged and they were classified as damaged, and then actual labels which were not damaged here in this green box, and they were classified as not damaged as well. Okay, so I think we'll nicely come to the end of this presentation, and what I would like to do is I would like to reiterate the arguments that I made in the very beginning of this presentation, which was that during disasters people are willing and motivated to help, and organizations need to learn how they can effectively utilize the wisdom of the crowd. The second argument was lessons from past can help us understand crowdsourcing during disasters. We saw how during 1966, the crowdsourcers had initiated the call to participate, and how successful they were in generating not only money for this, but a lot of interest in volunteering and so on. The third argument is during disasters, user-generated data from social media can help us understand the damage that has been done on ground. And we saw that using Twitter text and using Twitter images, we can actually understand the situation on ground. And the fourth argument was that AI can help us in damage assessment process. Like I said, the volume of data that gets posted during disasters is enormous, and because we want to be able to manually analyze it, we do need help from AI to help us in this process. So with this note, thank you very much. These are the publications that are related on this subject if you're interested. And here's my email ID if you want to get in touch later on, or my Twitter handle if you want to get. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Pakhee. That was super interesting, and I'm sure there will be questions. There's already one, so I'll go ahead. Just a short reminder that when you write a question, it would be great if you can mention your institution, if that's applicable. It normally helps the speaker frame the answer better. I'll start with a question from Roshan Yao, who says, thank you for the presentation, very informative. You've mentioned many benefits of crowdsourcing in safeguarding heritage, but it can also be exploitative. Just as commercial companies might greenwash their business practices with some small-scale environmental initiatives involving the crowd on projects can be argued as a form of dressing up a project to look participatory. What do you think of this? And Roshan points out that he's a heritage consultant working in an engineering firm.
Thank you very much for this. I know that this this challenge has come up, and this is, to be honest, not the only challenge in crowdsourcing, which is that it can be an exploitative process. Heritage professionals have also seen crowdsourcing as a loss of authority, and data quality is also a problem in crowdsourcing in heritage. To summarize, there are many different challenges that can occur in crowdsourcing, and I necessarily do not believe that the ones that at least that happens in heritage sector are exploitative. It is because the kind of tasks that heritage organizations do ask from the crowd are very small. They are not very time intensive, and lastly, there are always heritage enthusiasts who participate in crowdsourcing initiatives, which means that it is a symbiotic relationship rather than exploitative. It's not a parasitic relationship where the organizations are only looking to exploit your intelligence, but it's a mutual beneficial relationship. I'll give you one example from my own experience of using crowdsourcing. I've worked in transcribing projects, and one of my favorite transcribing projects is What's on the Menu from New York Public Library. And I must tell you that I'm not a food enthusiast. I do not like looking at menus and understanding what kind of food people cooked during that period. I think what sparked my interest was I wanted to know what was the price of coffee in New York during a certain time period. And when I started transcribing, I found data that was so interesting to me. So one of the menus said unaccompanied females were not allowed in the restaurants, which for me was a big surprise, but it's also a testimony of time that menus were printed. So for me, this is a mutually beneficial relationship when I work as a crowd in any crowdsourcing initiative. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Pakhee. I want to ask a follow-up question, if I may, insisting a little bit more on the potential negatives, because I was thinking about the history of social media and how we have the discourse about it. About 20 years ago, or 15, when there was the Arab Spring, Obama's campaign, there was a hype about the social good that social media could create. You know, people will self-organize, will topple the tyrannies and so on. But we have matured since then, and the Trump campaign, the Cambridge Analytica stuff, I don't know, the disinformation during COVID, all this has shows us the other side of the coin, right? So could you, with all the thought you have put on social media, do you think there's another side of the coin as well for engagement with heritage, response to disasters, maybe more generally? Are there limitations that could cause big problems if we are not aware of them?
This is a very interesting question, yourself. I do think that this is only the starting point for us. You know, this research that I presented today is the only starting point for us. There's one particular finding in my research which I think if we start using bigger data sets and other case studies will do emerge, which is indifference towards heritage. A group of people will always think, why do we need to protect heritage during disasters that do affect humans as well? And this was evident in the data sets that I had for 2015 Ebola outbreak. And there's, of course, misinformation. I don't think I covered misinformation today, but there was one of my my data science student, data science for cultural heritage MSc student, who analyzed Notre Dame data, and she found out that misinformation was a big part of this data set. And because we do not have many studies that do use data sets that were posted during disasters, we're only beginning to explore the challenges. I think one other challenge that I could also think of is the rapidly changing social media. Now that Twitter has a different owner, and the architecture of Twitter is continuously changing as well, and then there are new social medias that are emerging. So all of this, I think, when we look at it, I think it gives us more challenges to deal with. But at this point, I don't think we necessarily have the answers on, what might be the biggest challenge here. Really.
Thank you. Would we have another question for Pakhee? Maybe there's time for one more. If not, I have another one of my own, so I'll use that privilege. But if anyone has another question, please do write it. I want to ask about the demographic differences that you have observed. And I find myself wondering how other social media platforms could be used for this, apart from Twitter. For example, TikTok, or I'm sure there's something the cooler kids use that it's not TikTok and that I have missed. How do you think engagement can differ demographically, and does it help us try to guess how this sort of engagement could happen in different platforms?
This is, I think, a very interesting question. I think we would need to start with understanding the purpose of the platform first. So, for instance, when Facebook was created, it was created to connect friends and family. LinkedIn was created to for your professional networks. Twitter, on the other hand, was created keeping in mind that we need to update about news as soon as possible. Instagram was created to share pictures. So if we understand the purpose of these platforms, we will be able to better understand which platforms are best suitable for which purposes. So if I were, let's say, researching on social media engagement, then I probably would be looking at Instagram. There's one paper that we have recently published with again, a data science student of ours on engagement on Instagram. But I wouldn't look at Instagram during disasters, because this is not a microblogging platform that gets updated instantly. So I think for us, it's important to understand, which platform is used for what, and then what are our research questions, and then based on that, we can basically understand which platform. Does that answer your question, Joseph?
I think it does. Yes. The functionality of the platform matters equally or more than the type of users that use it as well.
I think types of user will have to keep in mind, of course, because that is definitely a limitation, isn't it? If first of all, we'll have to understand that there's digital divides. Not everybody has access to social media platforms. Secondly, there are some social media platforms which might be more popular in one country than the other country. Then there is certain demographics, which is of course present on social media. So the data that we have is actually already, if not biased, but comes with a certain limitation. So all of this we'll need to keep in mind. But at the same time, I think it, despite all of this limitation, it still gives us a very good data to be at least able to do a preliminary analysis, if not complete analysis.
And Pakhee, just to finalize, if you can answer in only 1 minute, we have one last question from the public, but very shortly.
Yeah.
It says, thanks for this meaningful presentation. Could you talk a little bit more about how do you create and come up with categories when you analyze text on Twitter?
This is a very good question. Thank you very much for asking this. To be honest, I spent months on this. It was because there was no other study that had been done when I was doing this. So I had no other study to base my my analysis on. So I analyzed the data sets, and then I reread tweets. I don't know how many times I had read tweets before I could finalize the category. But before finalizing the categories, there was also another researcher that I asked help from, and we wanted to see how much agreement there was between the two of us. So because I was doing the analysis mostly by myself, it's always best to bring in another researcher to have a look at what, if you have any biases, if you have any problems when you're analyzing the data. So there's another researcher who worked very closely with me on finalizing these. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Pakhee, let's leave it here in that case. It's been a fascinating presentation, and I hope to see you all next month, last Thursday of the month as usual, for our next presentation.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See you. Bye.